how long have you taught teenagers?
Oh, that's a great question. In any aspect?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been working with teenagers since 2008. Wow, I'm old. Yeah, so 12 years.
What is something special about teenagers that make you like teaching this age group?
I like teaching teenagers because teenagers are trying to find their identity. And so when you have the opportunity to have a genuine relationship with a teenager, you're able to have a profound effect on their life and also do it when they really need it. Okay, so what I also like working with teenagers is that they keep you young, and that a lot of times I think that teenagers, because in many ways they think some things that aren't serious are serious, in many other ways teenagers aren't serious, and they help you focus on what adults take too seriously. So I find that I just enjoy being around teenagers a lot more than adults, because teenagers, they're less serious, they are passionate about their interests, and they still dream, whereas most adults, we've given up on our dreams. We don't think we can do the things we really want to do. So I enjoy being around the, ignorant optimism that all teenagers possess, because it keeps me energized. No, let's say naive, that's more positive. But that naive optimism that teenagers all have is really energizing, and it's just really fun to be around.
What were some initial stereotypes you had when you came to Indonesia about Indonesian teens?
Oh no, I had nothing. I was an ignorant American and I didn't know anything. I didn't know where Indonesia was before I moved here. So the stereotype that I had, knowing that it was a private school for people who were upper class, was I kind of felt bad because I was teaching. I had taught at 3 different inner city schools with kids who I thought had real problems because, they were in gangs. One girl, her dad was murdered. Other kids were, getting arrested. And I thought, okay, I'm making a difference in their lives. So if I teach rich kids, I'm almost not doing as important of a job as I could be if I was back in LA or Austin. And so my stereotype that I had was that wealthy people don't have problems that are worthy of my time. And so because the only reason I moved here was I was poor and needed a job. So after coming here, I have learned that isn't the case, that everybody has problems. They're just of a complete different nature. It's kind of like The Outsiders, where you have the poor guy with the rich girl, and she's like, no, we have the exact same problems. We look at the sunset the same way you do. Literature.
When you started working in Indonesia, what were your first impressions, and did your first impressions prove to be different from your initial thoughts about Indonesian teens, and how?
Well, what really surprised me is how the stereotype of the respectful Asian student turned out to be even more true than I expected. Because I grew up with a bunch of Asians. My high school was 30% Asian, and so half my friends were Asian. And I knew that they were always good students, but I feel like at SBH, students are not just well-behaved, they are respectful. And so I really, really wasn't prepared for that, but I love it. The easiest way to describe this is just when kids leave, they say, thank you, Mr. Patrick. That would never happen in America. But it just makes me feel good. It makes me feel like, oh, you are acknowledging the fact that I work really crazy hours just to hopefully help you, and you're appreciative of that, or at least pretending to be appreciative of that. So I really like that. So that was the first thing that popped up. And I would say that what was different was partially because of school uniforms and partially because of just how respectful kids are at school. At least when they're in class, the idea of wealth doesn't often come up, and so I thought that I was going to be teaching rich kids like I had come in contact with in America, and SBH kids during class hours at least don't behave like that. So I was really glad to be wrong.
Did your initial stereotypes affect the way you treated these teens in some way?
I think so. My idea that I'm going to be teaching stereotypical Asian students, kids that work hard, who are pushed by their parents, and kids that are genuinely smart. When I first came here, it made me want to teach really, really hard and hold really, really high standards. Why? Because I can. And so I think that especially like my first couple of years, I was really, really strict and hard for no other reason than I could, and I knew I could get away with it. And so now I still do have really high standards, at least in my more academic classes, but I feel like I can hold those without being as rigid of a teacher as I used to.
Would you agree that stereotypes cause gaps in society?
Yeah, I would say that stereotypes cause gaps in society because it prevents us from actually wanting to get to know who people really are. So an example of this is in America, most people who are against government policies that help unemployed and poor people have this idea of there's some poor person who's living off of the government that is taking government checks and buying really expensive cars and spending it all on TVs. And so what ends up happening is that people stop wanting to help poor people because they think that there's somebody out there misusing their money. Could people be misusing their money? Sure. But the fact of the matter is that most poor people don't have enough money to misuse in the first place. But if you believe that there are people out there misusing their money, you're not going to try to get to know any poor person at all. So if I just define people by their stereotype, I don't want to be wrong. And because I don't want to be wrong, I'm never going to try to find people who might break that stereotype. So that would be the divide, that I just don't try to get to know the people that break that stereotype.
How is this bad towards Indonesian teens, as in like the gap?
Between like teacher and student?
Teacher, student, adult, student, people versus teens.
Well, so I guess the main stereotype that I've talked about is the idea of like, you know, the model Asian student. That's the biggest stereotype that as a white person I've come into contact with. And I think that if we just see our students who genuinely are good students and they're Asian, that we will tend to see them only as a product of what they do in class. And that's not why I became a teacher, and that's not really what motivates me. So if we just see students as a stereotype that in some ways they actually do fulfill, we miss 99% of who they actually are as a person. And so we'll never take the opportunity to get to know them. And for me, with my background in spirituality and stuff, that's why I became a teacher, was because I like helping people. It's not because I like teaching books. That's cool. But if I just defined everybody by what their stereotype is, which is an academically superior student, I wouldn't really know who they are in the first place.
You may have addressed this earlier, but just so it's easier to edit. As a teacher, what makes Indonesian teens special from teens in general?
Well, Indonesian teens like SPH teens.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
from your experience.
Wait, isn't this going to be stereotyping?
From your experience, what do you think makes them special compared to like?
Okay,
You know.
one of the most interesting things about Indonesian teenagers is how obsessed they are about being trendy and current and in the know about all of the current trends and parts of society. In America, students are on the cutting edge. Like I think when you're a teenager, you are on the outer edge of culture and you're always pushing it. But Indonesian teens, I've just noticed, want to be just on the cutting edge of whatever the trend is now. So I've noticed that about almost all of the students here. And I think that that part of just Indonesian culture, I think that's an Indonesian thing. I don't think that's Indonesian teens. I think that that also affects the expatriate kids here too. And they become people who are just very interested in
Okay.
the edge of culture.
Okay. All right. Thank you.